Right, so everyone's talking about this at the moment, so I figured I might as well make a video on the fact that I do not care. I do not give two shits. In fact, I don't even give one shit. I don't even give 1/4, 1/16 of one shit about the current US presidential elections. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's saying, yay, Trump won, Kamala lost. And I'm burned out and more or less completely detached and disengaged from the situation over there. And I'm going to tell you why. So before you accuse me of being a jaded, cynical boomer, somebody who basically believes, but politicians, they're all greedy crooks, man, like, they're all in it for themselves. That's that's not exactly where I'm coming from. Well, I'll tell you a little bit about myself to explain why I feel the way I do. So, back in 2016, in my early 20s, when I was 21, I was very much on board the Trump train. You got to understand, 2016, it was a year of seismic change in the political arena because you could basically draw a line before, I think, June of that year and after, and you would have basically ended up with two very different times. So before June 23rd, the EU referendum happened. It was pretty much taken as a given that there were certain things that you weren't really allowed to discuss. There were certain debates that weren't allowed to be had in Parliament. Before these issues were raised with the populist revolution, because that's what I think people are looking at it in retrospect. 2016 was the year of the populist revolt. We had the EU referendum in the UK, and there were things in mainstream political debate that were just taken for granted, and we weren't allowed to have a fair discussion of, like the migrant crisis, the fact that we were taking all these adult men, because not women and children, but adult men, mainly from Muslim majority countries, from the equatorial and south equatorial regions, who were completely indifferent to Western culture. A lot of whom were, basically living off benefits and hold on, gotta bounce this. And some of whom were committing crimes. I remember there was, hold on, let's switch that off. There was a scandal that happened in I think on New Year's Eve in Cologne of, I think it was 2015, where all these Moroccan migrant men were they were setting off fireworks in the middle of the town square as a distraction. Then they were going around harassing and groping young women. And the media covered this up, and the politicians didn't talk about this. So there was a whole range of issues, and none of these issues were getting a fair hearing. Because if you brought these up on television, you'd be silenced. They'd accuse you of being a racist and a far right fascist, or at the worst, you'd probably get thrown in prison, even for merely talking about it. There was one guy on Twitter who said something about, why wouldn't the Muslims stop the terrorists from committing crimes? That's such a mealy-mouthed excuse. And he got arrested for saying that. I don't remember his exact name, but the fact that happened, that's the kind of climate we were living in. And very much it was the same over across the pond in the United States. See, I don't have an insider's perspective as to what most Americans think, but I'm sure I can hazard a guess. Illegal immigration, the immigration period, is a major issue, but illegal immigration is the most alarming because America shares its border with Mexico, and a lot of the people who are basically hopping across the border and basically becoming citizens of the United States. And it's a very scary situation because none of these people had any kind of background check. A lot of them were criminal gang members of gangs like MS-13. Really, really dangerous, dodgy people. Like if you've seen Breaking Bad, any of the cartel gangsters. Basically, that's the caliber of people, more or less, that are coming. And there's lots of rampant murders and crimes going on. And then, of course, there was the matter with Islamic terrorism. I think when Trump announced his pledge to ban immigrants from Muslim-majority countries, I think this was in 2015, it was only 14 years ago that America witnessed their biggest ever terrorist attack in their country's history, September 11th. And even then, later, around that year, there was the San Bernardino shooting, which was another really, really terrible attack. And then there was also the Pulse nightclub shooting. All of these were done by Muslims. So the idea of preventing Muslims from entering a country when they're overrepresented in the terror and gun shooting statistics is a really sensible move. But this kind of thing was deemed unthinkable at the time before Trump announced it. And in fact, especially in the UK, where we have a sizable Muslim population, and Muslims, they have quite a considerable stake in our governments. We have the Muslim Council of Britain. We have all these quangos and these pressure groups who are dedicated to advancing the interests of the Islamic population in the UK. And our government is very left-wing, and all the people in Westminster are very left-wing. They care nothing for the sensitivities of ordinary people, or those who are afraid of getting blown up on the subway, or those who had little children go to that Ariana Grande concert that would happen in that terrorist attack that would happen a couple of years later. So it shook us to our very core. We actually had this petition, this gay little petition that garnered 5 or 6 million signatures, mainly from faggots, who wanted to ban Trump, who would later become the then incumbent president of the United States. And the petition actually resulted in a debate on our television. You know, it's funny to think what would have happened if the government had decided to ban future President Trump. That would have been an amusing and interesting situation to unfold. But yeah, we were such a cucked nation back then. And when Trump finally became president, gosh, I could feel the earth quake beneath my feet, because I knew this was an upset. This was an historic upset. Like none of the people in charge had counted on this actually happening. It's funny to think back how would he have won or would he have lost if his opponent hadn't been Hillary Clinton? Because Hillary Clinton, I have a very shallow understanding of her knowledge, but basically my understanding is that she basically became head of the DNC because, first of all, she was a woman. Second, she knew all the right people. Her husband, Bill Clinton, was literally the president of the United States a couple decades before. And the DNC was basically rigged from the start. You know, there was this other guy, Bernie Sanders, who I think had a lot more of the youth and populist appeal that perhaps would have mirrored that of Trump's, but he didn't get through because the DNC was rigged. And Hillary Clinton, well, she wasn't just an ordinary politician. She was one of those stereotypical career politicians, and she had a pretty black record. I think all the things that happened. She used her personal email address to for personal private emails when she worked as Secretary of State. I think. If there's anyone who understands the knowledge in better detail, feel free to correct me on this one. Also, due to her negligence, the US ambassador of Libya, he also got killed by some Islamic insurgents. And she didn't do anything to protect him. Apparently there were warning signs that there was a terrorist attack, and she didn't do anything. She was dismissive. And also, I think she had a role in the toppling and the overthrow of Muammar Gaddafi as well, because democracy, we got to spread democracy all over the world. So there was this enormous mimetic energy back in 2016. All the cool kids wanted Trump to win. There there was the smell of revolution in the air. All these memes were being made about make America great again. It felt like, for once, the youth were engaged in a revolution that was determined for a positive outlook on America's future. We were going to build a wall across the southern border, which was actually a very common sense policy, because it would stop the tides of criminal gangs who were hopping across the Rio Grande and getting into America, stopping potential terrorists from entering the United States. Yeah, that was actually a good idea. I think we probably could have, in hindsight, implemented a similar policy to that too. yeah, right, with our current government. And just the idea of the trade war in China. It's funny to think there used to be a time and period where not everything in the world was manufactured in China. Wouldn't it be great if we could actually enjoy consumer goods that were produced in America or in Britain or in Western countries? You know, this idea of putting on a trade import tariff on Chinese goods, it's a really sensible idea, but that was what made Trump so controversial. He was our guy. And all the people back then, like Milo Yiannopoulos, before the stuff about him being a bit funny with kids, Nick Fuentes, there was that Richard Spencer guy, Paul Joseph Watson, Sargon, all the big names in the increasingly in the reactor sphere, or the dissident right, as it was rise. That's what I refer to it back as. There was this growing conversation where, for once, there was going to be an uprising of European nationalism and pan-European nationalism and America first. But then, over the course of the next few years, all that energy began to dissipate. See, Trump made a bunch of promises. He promised that he would build the wall. There was literally even a petition where people volunteered to pay money to get the wall constructed when Congress refused to fund it. There was the promise to implement a ban on Muslim majority countries. And I don't really know what came of that. I think it was implemented with some countries, but I don't think it was the case with Saudi Arabia or any of the rich oil Gulf states. And keep in mind, like, the vast majority of the September 11th hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. So wouldn't it have made perfect sense to implement, a ban on people coming from those countries? But no, for one reason or another, it just didn't work. And the worst part, I think the biggest sort of indictment on Trump's administration was how he handled the Summer of Love, that outbreak of rioting that took place in 2020, if anyone remembers that, when that common criminal, George Floyd, everyone celebrated him like he was a martyr, like he was an innocent black guy who got mercilessly killed by the system, conveniently forgetting the fact that, like, he held a pregnant woman at gunpoint, and he was a common criminal, and he was a fentanyl addict. He didn't even get killed by the policeman who supposedly killed him. He suffered from a fentanyl overdose. Yeah, this is the martyr of Black Lives Matter that the whole country went buck wild and went crazy and rioted all over about. Now, the entire time, Trump was still in office at the time. He could have implemented measures to stop the rioting. He could have called in the National Guard. He could have called in the army. Look, I refuse. He could have he could have declared martial law. There's so many things that he could have and should have done. He's the commander-in-chief. He's the guy at the top. But what I think happened, see, I have a very facile understanding of how politics really works in the United States, but I refuse to believe that he couldn't have just done something, or he could have said something, but he basically, more or less, he just sat there and fiddled while America was burning. And worse, I think what he did was, I think he used he used all the wave of violence and crime that was going on at the time as part of his re-election campaign, so as to say, look, this is what the Democrats are doing. The radical left Democrats are going around trashing up our people and smashing up all our shops and all our shopping malls. And I tell you, it's going to get real. It's going to get bad. It's going to get real bigly opposite of terrific. Okay? Believe me when I say it's going to get bigly bad. It's going to be so bad. And if you vote for me, I'm going to make it terrific. I'm going to make America great again. I'm going to give you your jobs back. And we're going to bring back the economy, and it's going to be terrific, folks. I can tell you that. It's going to be huge. But the plan didn't work. So I kind of, even though I'm not American and I don't have a personal stake in what was going on, I kind of felt let down because I felt like he delivered a bunch of promises which turned out to be nothing more than political posturing and hot air. Now, I know that there are many people who have doubts as to what really went on during the Schmoo-thousand and Schmenty Schmesidential Smelection. I gotta watch what I say here because YouTube has been taking down videos here. But I do know that the election of that year was highly contested and highly controversial. There's a lot of talk about where those mysterious mail-in ballots really came from and whether they were legitimate or not. I don't want to offer a viewpoint because I am scared about what YouTube might do to my channel if I talk about this too much. However, Trump did not win in his second term. President Biden won, and honestly, even if I find it hard to believe, really, even though people were disillusioned in Trump, that they would have preferred a man like Biden. Because he wasn't really fit to be president, and people must have, he just struck me as an incredibly unremarkable figure. Like, somebody who's been in the civil service and been in politics all his life. What was he? Was he the senator of some northern state, like was it Vermont or Delaware or something? What did the guy even do? I have no idea. He was VP for President Obama. So that was his claim to the presidential White House. I think his only appeal for leftists was that he was not President Trump and that Hillary Clinton, her campaign didn't work. But yeah, Biden's term of office, well, I mean, a lot of people have pointed out in much better words than I could just how bad that was. You know, the massive money printing in 2020 during the lockdown, the fact that the US dollar is plummeting in value, and I think I read somewhere that 80% or something of all the M2 American currency was printed in the last couple of years. Now that is pretty terrifying. That is just extraordinary. Like, so much of the inflation that's happened, and we've been affected by this too, because our modern monetary policy, we've implemented the same thing too. And goodness, the inflation was so tangible. I felt the pinch in my local pub, and yeah, there's a lot to be said about there. Then the clumsy, ham-fisted withdrawal out of Afghanistan. So President Biden's term, I don't think people will look back on that too fondly. However, the key point that I'm trying to make, that I wanted to make from the beginning, is that I don't really care that much now that Trump is back in office, and I'm going to explain why. So the main reason, first of all, is I don't really think that true power, neither in the American Senate nor in the British Houses of Parliament, really rests in the Oval Office. I don't believe the President of the United States has as much power as we think he does. There are all these unnecessary checks and balances. Like, for instance, if you want to pass a law, you need bipartisan approval from both sides in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. And honestly, the less said about those, the better, because those people are just, well, they're useless. But actually, I don't even, to a very large extent, I don't even think power rests there either. Who is it that really controls America? Well, in my view, here's my understanding of the situation. In American politics, the real seat of power is not in the Oval Office, it's not in Congress, it's not in the Senate, it's in these large corporations, it's in the Federal Reserve and the civil service. So America has a massive problem with a massively bloated civil service, much like we do in the UK, who has basically become a law unto themselves. I think this is what people refer to collectively as the deep state, or part of it. Now, none of these people who work in all these departments, these government, these civil service departments, none of these people are accountable at all. They're not elected, and it's basically impossible to get rid of them. A lot of I think a lot of people think that one of the reasons why Bernie Sanders couldn't become the DNC nominee for either the 2020 or 2016 election is because of this network of vipers, this den of vipers who secretly control things in the civil service. You would theoretically, it should be easy. You just get rid of them, like slash the civil service budget, lay off everyone, like with what Elon Musk did with Twitter. He got rid of something like 80% of the staff who worked in Twitter, and Twitter still works even now, or X as it's now called. But more worryingly, it's not just the civil service, it's also big corporations like Silicon Valley, the big tech firms. Honestly, they are a law unto themselves. You guys all saw how the moment Trump lost the election, they banned his account on Twitter. This is before Elon Musk took over. Even though he was basically the leader of the free world. They did it to demonstrate their power and where their true allegiance lives. And they tried fact-checking basically everything he said. And they used their algorithmic machinations, and they manipulated the algorithm so as to boost left-wing partisan propaganda and to make people less likely to engage with any of Trump's presidential campaigns and stuff. And then, of course, there's the traditional media as well. Like all these big corporations that have enormous, we're talking 9 figures worth of capital. And these are the ones who truly hold the biggest stake in the outcome of the presidential elections. And ultimately, I think they're the ones who call the shots. And not just big corporations, but pressure groups and interest groups. Like, if you take a look at American politics, one of the most surprising things is how, even though America presents itself as a democracy, as a republic, where you vote for a constituent congressman and he represents a certain area and every congressman and congresswoman is elected, you would think it would be that simple. But actually, there are certain things that are not up for discussion in American politics. There are certain matters which have and strongly retain a bipartisan consensus. One of these is Israel and Palestine. It's ridiculous that everyone in the US Congress is a massive supporter of Israel, and they'll rarely ever bring the fanaticism of people like Benjamin Netanyahu to heel. To my knowledge, I really only think there's one person of Congress who's actually an outspoken critic of Israel, and I think that's Ilhan Omar. And obviously, she's a Muslim woman, so it makes perfect sense that she would speak out against Israel. But mainly, the reason for this is because there is a lobby group called AIPAC that's got big money, and what they do is they offer money to these members of Congress. They give them these kickbacks, and they take them on these trips to Israel. And they had them do this little ceremony where they kiss the Wailing Wall and they put their head up against it. And there's this big sort of synchronicity between all the big talking heads in the American government and with Israel. So, and this explains to a large extent why whenever Israel does things that are considered out of line by the United Nations, and whenever it violates human rights, the United States will rarely ever, enforce sanctions upon it. I think I remember there was in the wake of October 7th, the October 7th massacre, Israel just started bombing the crap out of Gaza and the West Bank, I think. And there were lots of countries that wanted a unilateral ceasefire for Israel, but America vetoed this debate, or America didn't vote for a ceasefire. Even China thought that Israel was going a bit too far. But really, all this goes to show is that all the people who control America, they are basically more or less the same people who control what goes on in Israel and the Knesset too. But the Israel and Palestine matter is only one matter in which is just one specific example of the phenomenon I'm addressing. So basically, my take is, it doesn't really matter who controls, who sits in the Oval Office, well, Trump or Kamala, because the Oval Office is not the true hub of American power, of government power. The true mechanisms of power in America are a lot more nebulous and hard to pin down. There's all these shady multi-billion or trillion-dollar conglomerates that exist, who secretly use their wealth and their influence and their lobbying power to advance their interests. They're the true ones who control America. And Trump can do what he likes. He can try to advance laws. He can try to get a budget approved. But at the end of the day, I think what's going to happen will be more or less like last time. And once his second term expires, who's going to replace him? Who's going to carry on? Who's going to pick up the pace from where he left off? Who's going to carry on that mimetic energy from the revolution we were promised back in 2016 once Trump is no longer around? These are questions that nobody in the dissident right ever likes to ask, but I feel like they're questions that are worth addressing. I could go on for a lot longer about what my thoughts are on who really controls the US Congress and everything, but I've already said, I've had nearly 30 minutes of chatting, and I gotta do my collection route now. So, but anyway, in a nutshell, this is why I feel the way I do about the US presidential election. So anyway, I've said my piece for now, and I'll see you guys later when I get another idea for a video. Catch you guys later.